everybody, and welcome. Thanks for joining us. Hi, I'm Jackie Kwan, co-founder of Uplifter, and with me today is Garrett Trod, our product expert. How you doing today, Garrett?
Hello, doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and I'm excited because today we're going to be doing an introduction to our Uplifter software for gymnastics clubs. If you're a gymnastics club and you aren't sure how to get started with Uplifter, don't know where to build your system and get it up and running and ready for you to start registration or use it as a website, this is the video for you. Now, we do have a number of other videos available that will take you a little bit more in-depth into some of the more specific features of Uplifter that you might use, but this is going to give you a nice overview of the entirety of Uplifter so you know how to get started and get up and running. And if you have questions, as always, you can always contact us at support@uplifterinc.com. But I'm going to pass everything over to Garrett and have him move along.
Yes, thank you so much, and welcome everybody to our Learn Uplifter video. Today we are going to get started with the core elements of Uplifter and how these elements interconnect and combine to make something more meaningful like your club site. To begin, we will start where everyone begins, which is logging in and creating an account. Now, your site might not look like this right off the bat, but of course, that is something that you can pursue if you choose to. What's most important is in the top right-hand corner, you will see a login button. By clicking this button, you're going to see a login option, which allows you to log in with your credentials should you already have them. If you don't have them, of course, you're going to want to select the first-time registering option, which brings up the first-time registering form. This form allows you to enter in your information to create what's known as a member account within the system. Now, everybody who's going to interact with your site and system needs to create a member account in order to do so. So that's parents and guardians, but that's also your administrators, your board members, your coaches and instructors, really anyone who wants to interact in a meaningful way with your site. Once they've created a member account, they will have created credentials to log in with, and they can certainly do so. Once they log into the system, they'll have access to additional pieces of information such as their My Account, which they can find by hovering over their name and clicking My Account. Up until this point, you're experiencing everything that a standard member, a parent or guardian, would experience on their own accord as well, on their own accounts. They can see information about their invoices, about their statuses. As you can see, some overdue payments are out here. But additionally, if you were eagle-eyed, you may have also noticed this admin button here. Now, Alan, the admin that I have logged in as, is actually a site administrator and has additional access to the system. So beyond what a standard member can do, Alan can move forward with administrative role elements. You may have also spotted that there is an admin link when hovering over your name as well, again, if you have the correct permissions, which is the very first topic we're going to move to. In order to do so, I'm going to click this admin option here, or I can click here if I'd like to, and this brings us to the admin side of the site. Now, depending on your permissions, you will see a varying list of options on the left-hand side. And these are the administrative menus that you can use to create and upkeep your site. On the left-hand side, we are going to navigate to Settings, Permissions. Now, permissions allow you to create brand new groups or work with groups that already exist within your system. And when doing so, you can update the name of the group at any time, of course, but you can also add members to the group by typing in their name and selecting them from the system suggestions. Of course, you can remove them from the group by simply selecting the delete icon. And on the right-hand side, you can introduce permissions to the group, which gives them additional access beyond the standard of what a standard user might experience. You can use this drop-down to add permissions. As you can see, there's quite a list that you can add. And of course, you can remove permissions by selecting the delete icon. If you'd like to learn more about what these permissions do, you can simply hover over the question mark icon to learn exactly what this permission is. Now, if you do actually want some additional information, or if you'd like to see some suggested examples of groups and how you might want to structure things, you can absolutely do so in our documentation. Now, depending on the administrative page that you're on, you'll see this icon right here, which allows you to go directly to the most pertinent article based on the page that you're on. Now this, of course, being on the permissions page, we've gone to the permissions article, and as we scroll through this article, we'll be able to see not only the permissions group, but some example groups, which tells us a little bit about how we may want to structure our groups. Of course, you don't need to go exactly as these groups are. These are just suggestions. And we do also have at the bottom an exhaustive list of all the permissions so you can review exactly what these do, exactly what pages you have access to by being granted this permission, etc. And in so doing, you can confidently create groups and give those users access to exactly what they need within the system. Excellent. Now that you have permission groups set up within your system, you can move along to the first section of the site that we'll need to customize, which is our categories. This is found through Settings, Categories. Now, on the categories page, if someone has already been interacting with your system, you'll see categories on the left-hand side, and for each category you have, you will see category levels on the right-hand side. So your categories are essentially the curriculums that you offer, the varying curriculums. So Cangym, cheerleading, you might have mag and wag, etc. And then within those categories, you have your category levels or subcategories, and these represent the progression through that curriculum. So if we go to Cangym, for instance, this will be very familiar to you all as you go through the badges. In order to introduce a category, simply add category at the top here, and you can introduce a name and your first category level. Once you have a category in place, you can select the edit icon to edit that at any time, or you can add a category level by selecting this plus icon. And of course, if your category level and your category are not in use by programs, etc., you can also remove that category if you so choose. Selecting the add category option allows you to enter in a name, and then it will be listed on the right hand side, which you can then fiddle with. Now, there are a ton of different ways that you can customize and structure your curriculum based of course, your requirements and restrictions. And this is exactly where you can introduce varying things like mid and max age requirements or progression requirements. You have to have completed the past category level in order to progress to the next one. And so you can introduce these very quickly into the system, first by selecting this tools icon beside the category level and choosing to add a requirement group. Now that's what this guy is right here. We've just added another one here. We have our requirement group. And this is essentially a logic controller for the requirements that we're going to introduce. We're going to actually double back on this in just a second, but before we do, we actually want to introduce the requirements first. So we can do this by selecting the tools icon beside the requirement group we've just introduced and selecting add requirement. This allows us to introduce a series of requirements or even just a single requirement if we'd like, depending on the caveats we would like to set. Now, min and max age are very common. The list that you have here and the options that you have available may actually be dependent on the tier of uplifter that you have, but min and max age will always be here for you. And so if we were to select min age, we can then specify the minimum age we'd like to allow into this program. Now, in a little bit, we're going to see how to control when they need to meet those ages by. We'll see that in just a moment. But for now, all we're concerned about is what age we want them to be when they're entering into programs within this category level. So for Burgundy, for instance, we see that we have a requirement that they need to be between the ages of 3 and 5. Now, right now, the requirement group of this says that it only requires one of these two requirements to be true, and that's really not what we want. So in this particular instance, I, as a club administrator, want to be sure that they are exactly between the ages of 3 and 5 if they're going to be in Burgundy. So I'm going to select this tools icon, and I'm going to edit the requirement group, which allows me to do two things. It allows me to control the strictness of this requirement, which we'll talk about in just a second, but it also allows me to specify how many of these requirements are actually required. So this dropdown is actually dependent on how many requirements you have. If I had a third here, I would see none, one, two, and then all. In this particular instance, since I only have two, my options are limited to these three options here, and I'm going to say they need to have all of those requirements met. Now, as I noted, we're going to double back on the strictness. Depending on how strict you want this requirements to be, you can specify this in the dropdown. Warning only will show a warning, but still allow the user to progress through the checkout process. Preventing add to cart will actually halt them from adding it to their cart until they meet the requirements, if they can do so. And prevent checkout will actually allow them to add it to their cart, but it will stop them from checking out until they have met those requirements, if they are allowed to do so. Now, there are varying reasons why you might use these, especially for your first season, though. We do recommend using warn only, and that way you're leaning more towards erring on the side of maintaining a registration rather than restricting one. So that's a great option for your first season with Uplifter. And as you progress, you can become more and more strict. Now, with things like age, if that's the only requirement series that you're introducing, you can absolutely be as strict as you'd like. That's no problem. But as I expand things like red, we see that there are some other requirement types like category level, which I have to have completed burgundy before I can enter into red. And there's also an achievement within the system, which is another indicator that I've completed my burgundy badge. So in this circumstance, especially for my first year with Uplifter, I'll probably want to be less strict with these requirements so that users can register if they feel like they're valid for the red tier. So I can edit this requirement group and I can say I only want to warn them and just let them know they might not actually qualify and we're going to review their registration. Again, as you move forward with Uplifter, you'll have more information to rely upon, and that way you can be sure that those who are registering should be registering, and you can become more strict with these requirements. And so that is categories, category levels, and requirements and restrictions. Now, you don't need to necessarily introduce all of these elements all at once. Basically, what you'll want to do is introduce just some basic categories and some basic category levels to indicate the curriculums you offer and the progression through said curriculums. These type of requirements and things like that, you can always come back and double up and sort of add these whenever you're ready.
Categories and category levels are used throughout the system in terms of reporting, and as well used to set up the layout of your registration pages and your custom registration pages that you set up on your front end. So when you do sit down and you try and figure out how it is that you want your categories to appear, you might want to keep all of those things in mind. And as you explore the system, you'll realize, oh, if I set these types of categories, it will allow me to pull these types of reports or allow me to categorize my participants in these types of ways. So lots of different ways that you can customize Uplifter. So give some thought to all of this. And what is great about Uplifter is that you as a club can decide on your own what's the best way to set up your categories and category levels.
Absolutely, that's very true. You may not follow this Cangym this strictly. You may have a kids where you have crickets, rabbits, and tigers. That's totally fine. As Jackie mentioned, it's a very flexible system, and you can build it exactly how you need and want to build it. Excellent. So once you have your categories and category levels set up, we are ready to move to the second element that allows us to prepare ourselves for our first series of programs, which is our season. And this is through products and programs seasons. Now, on a seasons page, you can create a brand new season from the toolbar, or you can work with an existing season from this drop down and selecting the edit icon. A season is essentially an encapsulation of a series of programs. You probably already have seasons within your organization, some basic start and end dates of when people register and when people are done their programs, and those can be obviously translated very cleanly into Uplifter. When you are creating or editing a season, you'll be able to name said season, and you can also specify a start and end date for the season. It is important to note that your season should start before the first date of your first program, and it should end after the last date of your last program. So there should be a little bit of a cushion there. Additionally, we also have an age cutoff date. Now, as we were speaking about categories and category levels, one of the requirements that we could introduce there was age requirements. And so they needed to be 3 or 5 or what have you. And so the question then becomes, when do they need to meet those age requirements by? And that's exactly what this age cutoff date is. This is the date on which they need to meet those age requirements. So if you have a minimum age of 3, they need to be 3 by this date. Now, this is a season level age cutoff date, and this will actually trickle down to all of your programs. We'll see the program creation in just a moment. During the creation of programs, however, you can customize a unique age cutoff date on an individual basis as well. So you can set it and forget it at the season level if you want, but you can be more specific at the program level as well if you need to be. Additionally, within the season, you can create holidays, exception days, and season event days. Holidays will halt the programs that you're creating, will halt the events that they're generating on the day or days that you specify. Exception days will do the same thing, except that you are also able to specify a time as well as a location. And season event days won't actually have an effect on your events. Instead, it'll add its own event to the calendar so users know that something's going on, maybe have a year-end event, a fundraiser, something like that. Once you're happy with the season that you've created, of course, click Save, and that will save that in your system for use. Now, those two elements that we've just gone through, they'll actually have defaults in place for you right away. So if you'd just like to get started with creating a program, you can absolutely do so. You don't necessarily need to go through all of these items right out of the gate. You can jump right into creating programs if you'd like to. We looked at these two items first so that you had a core understanding of these fundamental building blocks. But now we're going to take a look at programs and see how these intertwine into the main element that you're going to be offering to your end users. To begin, let's navigate to products and programs. Programs. On this page, as you can see, you'll have a list of your currently active programs if you have any already created. And of course, you can create a brand new program from the Add New toolbar, which is what we'll do. After clicking Add New, the Create Program form will open up, and immediately at the top left, you'll have the ability to toggle between basic settings and advanced settings. Depending on how detailed you need to be with your program, more often than not, you can get away with just the basics. But today we're going to be taking a look at advanced settings, which actually toggles a few more ways that we can tweak our program. So with advanced settings selected, we'll now begin. The first section is the program information, which allows you to specify a name and a description. These will of course show up on the public side. And next we can also specify a program SKU. Now within Uplifter, everything that you sell, products, programs, subscriptions, etc., they all need to have a SKU. And the only real rule is that the SKU needs to be unique compared to any other SKU that you have in your system. And because it needs to be unique, we highly recommend that you serialize your SKUs to not only make it nice and easy to make a new one, but also offer a lot of information when you happen to see a SKU in a report or what have you. Note that your end user won't actually ever see a SKU unless you add it to the program name or description. So this can be something that's completely internalized. In this particular instance, you might want to do something like 2021, and this is going to be my winter season, and maybe it's going to be my Cangym, and maybe I'm just doing my red. So by having something like this, we have a very structured SKU, which we can rely on not only to glean a lot of information, but we can also very rapidly update the SKU for next year because it needs to be unique next year. So all we need to do is if we're going to have this program again this next year, we do 2022, and now we've got a brand new SKU. It makes it very, very easy. You may want to also add additional information, things like Monday at 5, for instance. And that way you have a truly unique SKU, even if you do have multiple programs of the same category level or what have you. So with that set, you can then move on to the next section, which is categories. Now we saw information about how to structure your categories. Now when you're selecting a category, you can only choose one. So this is going to fall based off of my SKU here into my Cangym category, but of course you pick the most applicable one. And once you've selected your category, you can then select at least one, but up to all of the category levels involved. So if this was truly just a red program, I would check off red, but maybe it's not, maybe it's red and burgundy. And so I can check off both, or really as many that apply to the program that I'm hosting. So of course, if you do have some of your intro level things, it's very often that multiple levels are on the floor at once. So you can absolutely mark off who's invited to this program and who is not. Now, once you're happy with the category levels that you've selected, you can move forward. And the first option here that we have is the season. Now, we took a look at how to create a season. And of course, again, this is just an encapsulation of a series of programs. So for instance, if this happens to be a program that lands in your fall winter, maybe so I could update my SKU here into fall-winter. So now it falls into my fall winter. Now with that, we're going to move to program event times / registration visibility. In this section, we get to specify a first and last event date, which allows us to just dictate when this program starts and when it ends. So let's say for sake of argument, we're going to start it on the 7th and ends in April 30th. Next, we have the day time description, which allows us to enter in a little tidbit of when this program is taking place. Generally speaking, this should be rather succinct and offer a little bit of information about when the program's happening. Based off of the SKU that we selected today, we're going to do Mondays at 5. So our day time description might say something like Mondays at 5 p.m. Next, we have our registration start time, which is when users can start adding this item to their cart. So with this program starting on the 7th, why don't we kick this off on the 1st so people can add it right away to their cart? Next, we have the registration cutoff, which determines when users can no longer add this to their cart. And since this program flows all the way to the 30th, I'm going to allow them to register for this program up to the 29th. Why not? Actually, that doesn't make sense. Let's do the 25th. Next, we have our registration status. Now, everything within Uplifter can have one of three statuses. Our first is unavailable, which means that it's on the administrative side only, and even then it's to a fairly limited degree. And next we have our beta status, which is on the admin and the public side, but only for those who have the beta purchasing permission. At the beginning of this video, we talked a little bit about permissions, and among those permissions is one known as beta purchasing. If you've granted that to someone, then they'll be able to see beta status products and programs, add them to their cart, and check out. This is a great way to offer either testing options, so if you have board members or other administrators who want to test, and it is also one of the ways that you can introduce priority registrations, although there are better solutions out there. Last but not least, we have the public status, which allows you, which is visible on the administrative and the public side, of course. However, it is important to note that even if your program is set to public, it is only visible. It's not necessarily available for registration. If I have a program set for public and my registration start date is tomorrow, this means that users can see the program, but they cannot yet add it to cart. So you do have full control over whether or not someone can see it and whether or not someone can add it to their cart. In the next section here, we have enable drop-ins. Now, this is a feature available on our gold tier of Uplifter, and it's a great way to ensure that your classes are full each and every day. Drop-ins allow you to specify a drop-in start and a drop-in cutoff, which parallels the registration start time and cutoff, but this is specific to the drop-in. So what this means is it's specific to the individual event on a per event basis. Additionally, these fields allow you to specify dates and times, but they also allow you to enter in relative terms. So for instance, if I wanted to allow drop-in registrations maybe up to a week before the class actually takes place, I might say minus 1 week. Further, if I don't want to allow people to surprise me and be on the registration list, I might cut off the registration for any given event maybe 2 days before it actually happens. And so these will be relative to the individual events that we generate. Next, we have the drop-in event price, which of course is the cost for each individual event. Maybe this is going to be something like $15, but of course you can specify this based off of the program itself. And finally, we have the events themselves in this section here. From the toolbar, we can add a brand new event, and in so doing, we'll be presented with this pop-up, which allows us to select the location where our event is taking place. We can also specify how often this event occurs, and based off of our example that we've been going with thus far, it's going to happen Mondays at 5 p.m. So I'm going to say weekly on Mondays, and I can also specify a start and end time. We talked about 5 p.m., and maybe this is an hour-long class, so it goes to 6. Now, the first and last event dates, those are going to generate automatically based off of what we've already specified, but you can toggle these and adjust these if you need to.
Another side note with the start time and end time, even though the dropdown only has increments of particular times, you can actually type in those fields if you have very specific times, like for example, 6:15, as it were.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So once you're happy with the way that you've set things up, click OK, and your system is going to generate those events. Now, events not only generate in a list, but they also generate in a calendar, so you can actually pan through your calendar and see exactly how they're presented on your calendar. This is a great way to see not only what users might see on the public side, there is a registration calendar, but this is also what they'll see on their account when they log in. After they've registered for this program, they'll be able to see a personalized calendar that shows the events that they're registered for. Further in each individual listing here, we see the drop-in price. And if we want to, we can actually customize these events a little bit more. So let's say for sake of argument, on the 15th here, it doesn't actually start until 5:15 for whatever reason. So I can actually edit this individual event and say, you know what, this is going to start at 5:15. And so the system will say, well, do you want to do this for only this event? Do you want to do this for this event and all similar events? So this one and down? Or do you want to update for all similar events? So this one and back as well. In this instance, we just want this one event. So I'm going to click OK. And so now just this one event starts at 5:15. And if we see on our calendar, 5:15, and back to 5. Excellent. Now you can click add event as many times as you want, and you can introduce a different series of program or a different series of events. And so if your program happens to function on Mondays and Tuesdays at 5, then you can absolutely introduce that. So you can say, yeah, now it's on weekly on Tuesdays, etc. And you can move forward with that as you need to.
I'm just going to jump in before we head into the next section, which I'm anticipating Garrett is going to do, and just chat very quickly about drop-ins and our drop-in feature within Uplifter. We actually have some videos that go quite a bit more in depth in terms of the feature functionality of the drop-ins. But one thing to take note with drop-ins that is great with Uplifter is that we manage capacities automatically in the background for your drop-in programs. So, for example, if you know that you have particular class caps available, like you can only have 10 people on the floor at one time, and you're allowing full program registration, but you're also allowing drop-ins, Uplifter in the background will double check each particular date to ensure that you don't exceed that 10-person capacity across the entirety of both your drop-in and your full program registration. When Garrett goes down to look at some of the more advanced features of setting up your program, you'll see how you'll have a little bit more control over that. But keep in mind that when you do have drop-in, you have quite a bit more flexibility in terms of how to manage your capacities and the numbers of who you have and how much they're paying for those particular dates.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And you are correct. We are going to move on to the next section. That is fees and payments. Now, fees and payments are split into three basic categories, the first of which is full program fee. This allows you to specify just an upfront cost for the program. If I register, I have to pay X dollars. Now, when you're creating the fee that you'd like to charge for your program, you can do so as a flat fee. So maybe I want to charge $1,000 for this. That's great. Or you can also specify this on a per event basis. Now, if we scroll up slightly here, we'll see that I have 12 events. And so maybe my events cost $112 for whatever reason per event. And we'll see the final cost being 1,344 if I choose to register for this program. Additionally, I can enter in a fee description. So if we do want to sort of customize this a little bit, I can absolutely say, per class or per event or what have you, and this will update on the public side for me. The next option I have here is whether I can enable or whether I want to enable or disable prorating. When I enable proration, I can specify whether I want to do so in an automatic sense or a manual sense. By setting it to manual, I simply specify a price. And so maybe my program being a default of over 1,000 there, I want to prorate this to 1,000 for a little bit. This is actually a great way to introduce a sale price because on the public side of things, users will see the regular price and it will be struck out, and then they'll see the new price. So if you do want to sort of encourage people to buy for the next little bit, you can absolutely set a manual price. But more often than not, when it comes to proration, you're speaking about automatic proration. And so what this will do is it will divide the amount of events that are in the system by the cost, and it will actually reduce that cost over time for you. So for instance, if I want to calculate every one program, the system will allow an event to pass and then calculate the new cost of the program. Again, it's always going to be based on a per event charge. So this value divided by this number of events. But this lets it know how often it needs to recalculate. So maybe I want to do it every 2 events. It drops the number of times it recalculates, but the values are still technically the same. So as you can see, you get a nice little schedule here, so you know exactly when and how much your program is going to be, which gives you a lot of clarity into these costs. In the next option here, we have a payment method group, which allows us to select our desired group. We won't dive too deeply into this today, but in your site settings, you can set up payment method groups, which allow you to group up different payment methods you have, like credit card, check, cash, etc. And so you might do so by creating an online group, which is, debit, credit card, and gift certificate, or you might do an offline group, which is just your gift certificate, your cash, and your check. But of course, you can do an all payments, which includes all of those, which sort of a set and forget type method. But this allows you to control what type of payments you're willing to accept for this particular program. Excellent. So now that you have set those, we can move on to one of the other options. Now, depending on how you want to actually offer the payments, you can switch from full program fee and choose an installment option. And when I do so, I get a few more ways to customize how users are going to be paying. Now, to start off, I still have the same option of a flat fee or calculate per event if I want to. So let's actually change this to a flat fee of maybe $1,000. That's nice. Now that I've chosen the installment option, I can introduce an initial payment amount, and this is the minimum or the most direct value that users are going to pay right at the time of registration. So this program being $1,000, I might want maybe $200 up front. So at the time of registration, they're going to pay $200. Next, I get to determine how many installments are actually going to be used. In this particular instance, I've reduced the total cost to $800 to be divvied up between my installments. So maybe I want to be really nice and do eight installments of $100 each. In this particular instance, then I get to specify when those installments start and how often the installments occur. So maybe once every week or once every month, whatever I need to do. In so doing, I can create a payment structure that allows users to register and not have to pay everything up front, which is nice. Again, I can also enable and disable proration if I'd like to, and of course, I can select my payment method group. And our last option here, but certainly are not our least, is auto renew fees. And this is a fantastic option for gymnastics clubs. This allows us once again to specify a fee structure. Let's switch over to calculate per every, and let's say it's going to be $150 per event here.
Your classes are really expensive, Garrett. Just saying.
Those are expensive classes? Oh, well, maybe they're just not for you. I don't know. Next, we have the ability to set the fee description as noted. In this particular instance, it actually is quite handy to say something like per event or per class or something like that. And that way users know this is how much they're paying per event. That's a nice little breakdown, and it's not as jarring as seeing this 1,800. Next, we have the ability to specify a renewal billing period, and this is how often we want to charge or auto renew the user's invoice. Now, up front, users are going to pay a certain amount, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But what this will auto renew fee option will do is actually generate a new invoice as time goes by. And how often it does so is going to be based off of the renewal billing period. So I might want to specify a relative term here. Well, I definitely want to specify a relative term here of something like first day of next month. And so this is how often the invoice will generate. And then I can specify when these auto renewals or when this regeneration actually stops. I can either do so on the program end, which is definitely going to be your standard for your programs, but I can also specify X billing periods. So if I have something like a membership where you can come for 3 months or try it for 6 months or for a full year perhaps, but you don't necessarily want the actual membership to end, like the program you're generating, you can specify X billing periods instead. So I can say 3 months, and I can do a count of 3, add a new, 6 months, etc. And so I can do this for however many intervals I would like. And when users are checking out, they'll be able to select from one of these intervals that they would like. And this is how many times it will actually generate based off of your renewal billing period. So what does all this mean? Well, I have 12 programs here, 12 events, excuse me. And in the month of February, I have 3 events. So 3 events will be $450. And so if I register right now, if I register right now, I will need to pay upfront for these 3 events. So $450 out of my pocket right then. And then at the first of the month, next month, I'll be billed again automatically for the next month's worth of programs or worth of events. So in that particular instance, I now have 4. So now I'm looking at $600. So with this option, you can ensure that your monthly bills come in, and they're also based off of the number of events that are in that month. Now, beyond these settings here, you can also specify a default payment method. So when a new invoice is created, how would you like them to pay by default? They can technically override this if need be. Let's specify credit card in this particular instance. You can also specify whether or not you'd like an email to be sent out. That's always nice and handy. You can also toggle whether or not you'd like to use available credit by default. If this is toggled on and a user does happen to have a credit on their account, it will actually use that credit before attempting to charge them for any remaining balance. And we also have the ability to reuse previous invoice payment details, which is fantastic because if you are using credit cards, you can actually have them essentially automatically process this as each month goes by, which is really nice, not only for you and your club, but also for the end user. They can essentially pay once and know it's just going to come off of their credit card once a month.
We have other videos that describe more in depth how our auto renewal fees work, but a couple of words of note when you're setting up your programs. If you want to actually realize your revenues when you use our ledger reports feature, and that we won't be able to capture in this introduction video, but if you are wanting to capture your revenues at the time that you actually receive the money and your payments, you likely want to use the auto renewal fee option as opposed to in the installment option. The installment option is more for accrual type revenues where you're wanting to realize the entirety of the revenue all off the top. Your taxes are going to be calculated on the full amount all off the top, and then it's just going to be divided into a bunch of installment payments. But if you really only want to book your cash payments at the time that you receive them, you'll want to use the auto renewal fee. Using the per event pricing it gives you quite a bit of flexibility in terms of making sure that your cash flow is based off of the number of weeks that you have in a month, and being able to set the renewal period either for first day of next month, or even if you want it so that it's more based off of how often they or at the time that people register, you can do something like 30 plus 30 days, so that from the date that they register, it'll all automatically renew for the next 30 days and determine how many events would have appeared or would have occurred in the next 30 days to determine how much it is that they will be invoiced for that time.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Our final section here is the registration details, and this allows us to specify a withdrawal deadline. Now, currently, the withdrawal deadline is for administrative reference only, but we are working on a feature that's going to make this a much more important field in just a bit.
Are you sneak peeking that? Are we sneak peeking
I'm
that?
sneak
No.
peeking it right now. But for now, it is an administrative reference, so you can see, we're only allowing withdrawals up to the 25th. Further, of course, we have the age cutoff date. Now, this isn't a required field in this section, but as we noted when we were looking at the season, you can specify it at a season level and just sort of set it and forget it, or you can be more specific and set it at a program level as well. So maybe this particular program needs them to be 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever you by February 1st. Next, we have the ability to toggle whether or not this event is online. That's right. If you are going to be hosting any online events, so people are going to be joining from their homes or what have you, you can absolutely do so through Uplifter and add the online event link right here. Further, you can add a little event title And last but not least, you can add online event additional information. In this section, this is actually a great place to add in any passwords or any caveats for joining your meeting. In this way, users will only actually see this information after they've registered for the program itself. That's a great way to keep it secret and keep it safe. Finally, in this section, we have the ability to notify your logged in members of their active web meetings. So if a user happens to log in as little as 15 minutes or a little bit closer than that to the program event start time, the system will actually notify them and just tell them a little bit about, oh, hey, you've got a meeting, click here to actually join this meeting, and it will use your event link to do so. Next in this section, we have the ability to toggle whether or not your end user is able to see their waitlist position. We'll talk about waitlists in just a second, as you can see down here on the right-hand side. But essentially, this is a great way to ensure that your users are either aware or unaware of the position that they're in the waitlist. So as, of course, your class fills up and they put their name in the hat to be selected for registration, if you have this set to no, then you can manipulate who's first in that wait list. So generally, by default, it's going to be a first come, first serve. But if you need to sort of manipulate that a little bit, you probably don't want them to be aware of what position they're in, or they might catch on to what you're doing. Next, we have the checkout notifications. Now, we won't dive too deeply into this during this video either, but you can actually connect not only your administrators, but your coaches and instructors to particular products and programs. And in so doing, when they are purchased or registered for, you can actually send out notifications to those connected users. And that's a great way to keep your administrators as well as your coaches and instructors informed about registrations that happen, especially if they're very concerned or very correlated to specific programs. It's something that they run personally. It's a great way to keep them informed of registrations. And last but not least, we have the registration and waitlist capacity section. Now, this section actually usually doesn't have this bottom row. If I scroll back up here and disable my drop-ins, I now only have two options, which is my maximum registration spots and my maximum waitlist spots. So how many people I'm willing to let into the class and how many people I'm willing to let wait in line. However, if I do enable this, as Jackie mentioned, this gives me a lot more control over who's able to register and when. So for instance, if I wanted a maximum of 10 people in my class at any given time, I can also control how many of those registrations are drop-ins and how many of them are full program registrations. So for all of the events. In this particular instance, maybe I only want 2 people to be able to drop in, which leaves the remaining 8 to be full program registrations. I can do the same thing for my wait list. So maybe I only allow 5 people in the wait list, and only one of those people can be drop-ins for any particular event. And again, as Jackie mentioned, this is going to be calculated on a per event basis to make sure that no singular event exceeds 10 positions and no singular event exceeds 2 drop-ins or whatever settings you've set here. Excellent. So once you are happy with everything that you've entered in here, you can click create, and that will generate a brand new program for you, which will then show up in this fancy list right here. Of course, in this list, you'll see some basic information about the program you just generated, the name, the SKU, the start and end dates. You'll also see whether or not you have installments and prorations enabled, stuff, things like that. You'll also be able to see capacity, as well as you can edit the program if you need to make some changes. And further, you can also select to view a program using this magnifying glass, which allows you to work with the participants that have already registered in this program. So as we can see here, we have a nice participant list, and this list of participants that have already registered for this, maybe I want to start organizing them and putting them into groups so that I know, I have a blue group and a red group and what have you. I can absolutely do that from this page. I can select this option here to add a new group, and maybe I'm going to call this red, and I'll add another group, and I'll call this blue. And now that I have my 2 groups in place, I'm going to go to the ungrouped list, and I can simply drag and drop them into my varying sections and groups here. Not only that, but I can go to one of these groups and I can add a group coach so that the coaches know which group they're with. If that's applicable, if they're not doing rounds, what have you, you can absolutely specify which coach handles which group. And again, with those notifications, you can make sure that your coaches are aware of people when they register. You can also add a globalized coach that overlooks the whole program just up here if you'd like to.
The other reason why you might want to assign coaches to groups and to classes is because you also have the ability to restrict permissions at a level where only coaches associated with particular participants, either as a private coach or as part of a class that they're in, or the group instructor that they are part of, are allowed to see those profiles. So there's quite a bit of granularity in terms of the permission structure if you assign coaches to your classes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Excellent. Now, one of the favorite features by far for a lot of administrators within Uplifter is the ability to very quickly create these elements. Once you've got a few pieces in place, you can very rapidly generate more. One of the most common ways to do so is to select this copy option here, which allows you to just quickly generate a new program using this program's information. You can just fiddle around with those finite elements that need to be updated, maybe like the name and the SKU. Maybe it's at a different time or day, but the general overview of all the information from this program is copied, which is nice. Makes it a little bit easier not filling out that whole form. Additionally, you can also copy a whole season. This will save you a lot of time. Under Products and Programs Seasons, you can select a season that you'd like to copy. So maybe, for instance, I'm getting ready for my summer 2021. I'm going to select summer 2020, and I'm going to select this copy option here, which allows me then to specify a brand new season or work with an existing season in my system. So if I've already clicked new season and created my summer 2021, I can absolutely do so. If, let's say for sake of argument, this is my option here, I can then move forward with saving all my programs in beta. That's a wise choice. That way people can't see them until you're ready to let them see them. And I can also enable priority registration. This is another way to offer priority registration, and depending on your needs and desired outcomes, this might be a fantastic way for you to offer priority registration to your end users. Essentially, what this will do is look at the users who were registered last season and place them into the waitlist for this season's programs, which allows them, or which offers them priority registration. They get first dibs on registering once that program becomes open. Once you're happy with whether you've created a new season or an existing season, you can click Copy to Season. And this will bring you to a spreadsheet-like page which shows you all of the programs that you are copying. Now, as you can see, all of your programs are listed here, and as we scroll to the right, we see a lot more program information, including pretty much every facet that was in that standard registration form, that standard program creation form, sorry. Now, some of the cool elements that you can utilize to your advantage on this screen, not only can you work with all your programs at once, if you want to do that individually, you can absolutely do so. But if you use cell number 1 of any one of these columns, you will in fact affect the entire column itself. So maybe you're ready to set all of your programs to public, and now everything's public. Further, within the name and the SKU field, you'll have additional tools and options. As you can see, this dash copy on the end here, I want to get rid of that, and I don't want to do it one by one. So what I want to do is select this little down arrow, choose replace, and I'm going to look for dash copy, and I'm going to replace it with nothing. And now all my program names are nice and pretty. I'm going to do the same thing for my SKUs, dash copy, and get rid of it. And as we noted, we need to make new and unique SKUs. So if I tried to save this right now, I tried to create all these programs, these SKUs are the same as all the programs from the season I copied. So what I need to do is update these SKUs, and that's where that serialization comes in once again, because what I can do is I can use this search and replace to look for things like 2020 and replace them with things like 2021. And now all of my SKUs are up to date and ready to go. And again, you can move along these options here and update elements as you need to and where you need to. Once you've completed this process, you can also then finally go through the create column and uncheck any programs that aren't going to be included in this new season. Once you're happy with that, click create, and all of these programs will be generated for you.
Of note, this batch creation program page is also available when you want to update your programs. So from the program menu, if you filter a series of programs and you want to come in and work with all of those programs all at once, once they're filtered, just click the batch update link at the very top, and you're going to be able to do the exact same things that you were able to do on the season copy.
Thank you very much for that. Absolutely. So this is a fantastic way to very rapidly update not only your programs, but really anything that you need to update within those programs, and make sure that everything's up to date and everything's up to par there. All right. So now we've looked at a lot of information, and I know it's a lot to go through. We've only got a few more elements for the core of Uplifter. Believe it or not, there's even more we could look at. This is a very large and very robust system. Gives you an enormous amount of flexibility and control over what you're creating and how you present what you're creating. So there's definitely other videos and webinars to go through if you're interested in learning about any of those facets. For now, we are going to move along to products and programs, products and subscriptions. And in this section, we can generate and create products that are not programs. So that would include your standard products, your subscriptions, and your tickets. In order to do so, just like our programs, we're going to select Add New from the toolbar here, and this is going to present us with a product form. In this form, we're going to see a lot of familiar fields like product name and description. We've got that SKU again, product status, but now we have the ability to specify an applies to. Your program, for instance, would be similar to an applies to participant. It's one per participant. But for products, you can also specify an account basis. So one per family is very synonymous with that essentially. In this particular instance, we're going to select a participant. Next, we have the ability to specify a volunteer credit value, another element that we're not going to dive too deeply into in this video. However, you can create not only volunteer positions, but volunteer requirements within Uplifter so that users can't actually check out until they volunteer for something. But further, you can also create buyout options or products that users can purchase in order to volunteer. You can specify the number of credits that gives them. Additionally, we have the checkout notifications as touched on in the program. You can specify whether or not a user gets notified when someone purchases this item. In the next section here, we have the ability to specify an inventory, which allows you to say whether or not there is a limited number of options here. This is perfect for products that you're selling, like jackets or spiritware or what have you. You know, you only have 10 in your inventory. You can absolutely specify that. If you're doing things like tickets or anything like that, that's also going to be a great way for you to control how many users can actually purchase those tickets, especially important for things like year-end shows and stuff like that. Now, from this section, we're actually going to pass these two options and we're going to go to fees and payments. Fees and payments is almost identical to that of the program option that we saw, where we can do a full fee, we can do installments, or we can do auto renewal. One of the major differences, however, is that in the auto renew fee or the costs here, we can do an initial fee, which is the upfront cost when you're purchasing it. We can do also a recurring amount. So if there happens to be a difference in cost on the recurring months, then you can specify exactly how much that's going to be. Maybe it's $100 up front and only $25 a month after that. Further, with products, we can also specify a percentage on the subtotal. So if you happen to want to apply a fee, an administrative fee, or something of that nature that sort of compensates for some of the costs that you're seeing from Uplifter or from Bambora, that you can absolutely do so by specifying a fee here. Maybe you're going to do 5% on whatever the invoice total is. Now, if you happen to fill in the product information and the fee and payment section here, you have officially created a product, which again might be synonymous with something like spiritware or something like that. However, you do have the option of toggling a ticket and or subscription option here if you'd like. Now let's take a look at ticketing first. This allows you to generate a serialized ticket, which will not only have a unique code on it, which of course is just a sample right now, but it will also have a QR code, which can be scanned by smart devices like cell phones and tablets. When you are generating a ticket, you can specify whether or not this ticket can be redeemed multiple times. So if you do happen to have a class where you want people to check out the class for maybe 3 of them, and then after that they need to pay for the full class, you can absolutely say, yes, absolutely, you can redeem this ticket 3 times and join the class for free, for instance. Additionally, you can specify whether or not users can print this ticket before or after they've paid in full, which is a nice way to make sure that you've got your money before you're redeeming things. And last but not least, you have the ability to redeem for attendance. Now, when a user scans or redeems this code or redeems this ticket, excuse me, if you have this set to allowed or required, the system will specify that they can select a program. And when they select a program, the participant involved in this will actually be placed in the program just for that one event so that they can be taken attendance on or be evaluated or what have you, just for that one individual event, which again coincides with this max redemption very nicely if you'd like to have that sort of check out our club feel.
We have, again, a number of different ways that you can configure tickets to make it meet the needs of your club, whether it is for a drop-in pass or a multi-pass that a lot of clubs might be familiar with. That's how you might want to use a ticket. And you can also use these tickets in concert with our discounting system to allow them to actually use these drop-in passes at checkout so that they can pick a drop-in class and apply this drop-in pass ticket that they've used so that it can be basically advanced register for programs or classes.
And of course, one of the other elements that you do have available here is a ticket background image, which of course you can get rid of the Uplifter branding here and have your own branding. This you can do on a ticket by ticket basis, or you can actually do in your site settings to set a default so that you don't have to do this for each ticket. We are going to move along to subscription. Now, if you select this option, you will have the ability to mark whether or not this subscription is mandatory. And in so doing, this subscription will apply to invoices where applicable and will not be able to be removed by the end user. So that's a great way to make sure that people are paying fees that they need to pay for, especially for gymnastics fees or Gym Canada fees and things like that, but also for administrative fees and things of that nature. Next, we have the ability to toggle whether or not there are registration filters. This is a great way to control where and when this fee actually applies. So for instance, if we wanted to add a fee for just our Cangym, we can type in can and select it from the system suggestions. And by performing this action, we have tagged, quote unquote, Cangym. And by tagging Cangym, anyone who registers for a Cangym program will then see this subscription. Now, if we have this set to mandatory, it's just going to apply to their invoice. If we have this set to non-mandatory, then the system will suggest it, but they don't have to add it to their inventory. So by selecting Cangym, you can, of course, specify whether or not Cangym's will see this fee. And of course, you can actually be as broad or as specific with these tag filters as you need to be to ensure that those who are registering for X program will actually see this attached to their invoice or at least suggested. Now, of course, we did skip over a section here, and that is the duration of subscription. This allows you to specify how long the subscription is valid for. Our very first option is none, which means that as soon as it's purchased, it expires. Our next option is start and end date, which allows us to specify a beginning and an end. And if a participant is to register for a program that has at least one event in between these two dates, the system will then either prompt or apply this, again, depending on our mandatory status, to their invoice. Next, we have an effective duration, which allows us to specify a relative term based off of the date of purchase. So maybe we have a fee that's 365 days. You buy this today and you get this until February 3rd. Maybe this is only going to be 1 month, etc. You can add in those relative terms to determine how often this actually expires based off of the date of purchase. And last but not least, drum roll, we have the demo league season. Now, when you select a league season, whether it's GBC, GEO, GNL, etc., you'll be able to select a league season, which is actually directly pulled from your league entity. So in this particular instance, I'm going to select 2021. If I happen to select only these two options, I'm effectively creating a subscription that parallels the duration of my league season, which can be pretty handy for things like administrative fees that you only want to charge once a year or something of that nature. But since we're here, let's check off this box. This allows you to indicate to the system that this is an official registration membership for your league. In so doing, you will now have access to some additional drop-downs. Now, the drop-downs that you see here is going to be dependent on the league that you're with. So, for instance, we see discipline level and role, which is very close to what Gymnastics Ontario will see. If you're with Gymnastics BC, you'll see an additional one called sub-level. If you're with GNL, for instance, you'll just see discipline level, so on and so forth. In this particular instance, what we want to do is use these drop-downs to indicate what type of subscription this is. We need to parallel a membership option that our league offers. Now, if you want to know the various combinations of memberships, please reach out to your league body and they'll be able to offer you the combinations, specific combinations. Let's say for sake of argument, we're with Gymnastics Ontario, so we're using these three drop downs and we want to create a recreational athlete membership. So anytime someone registers for a recreational program, we want them to have the recreational program insurance. In order to do so, we need to use these dropdowns to specify that this subscription is in fact a recreational subscription. We can do that by selecting these options, and for Gymnastics Ontario, their combination is general, recreational, athlete. And by specifying these options here, we're saying that this is a recreational membership. And in so doing, we probably want to also introduce some checkout filters to specify that this is just for our recreational and our Cangym and just those programs that would qualify for recreational, or at least the lower end of Cangym there. Now, there might be instances where a membership that you're creating actually qualifies for multiple things. So, for instance, you might be doing an interclub athlete for both MAG and WAG. In that particular instance, you can leave the discipline empty and just say that this is an interclub invitational athlete. In so doing, when someone purchases this membership, the system will see that this one is blank and it won't know the exact membership it wants to submit, but it will have a very good idea. If you are able to specify all three of these options, then our system will be able to determine exactly what type of membership this is. And in so doing, we can connect with your league body to determine whether or not the participant in question actually needs this membership. For example, if I were to register with Club A and as a recreational athlete, I pay for my insurance and they submit it to my league body and league entity, I can then go to Club B and sign up. And since they're using Uplifter and they have a specified membership, they already know, because they're connected to the league body, that I have my recreational membership. And so when I check out with that club, I don't actually need to pay for my insurance again. So this is a great way to make sure that people are being insured when they need to be insured. Excellent. And now our final element to speak to with regards to the core elements is in fact policies. Through settings, policies, we can establish policies within our system that we either require or just request our end users to acknowledge and accept. Now, when you're creating a brand new policy, you can select Add Policy from the toolbar there. And once again, you'll be greeted by another form that you can fill out to dictate how your policy functions. In this particular instance, in the policy information section, you can add a name and you can specify how this applies, whether it's on a per participant basis or a per member basis. You can also specify where it's presented at, whether that be during the creation of their member account or each time they log in, or whether it's at the invoice or at the payment, what have you. And that way you have full control over when they're seeing it and how often they're seeing it. Additionally, we have a policy acceptance duration, and this allows you to specify when this policy expires. So you have in perpetuity, which means it never expires. You have none, which means that every time that they log in or every time they generate an invoice or whatever you've selected here, they need to accept this policy again. And in between those two options, we have an effective until, which means it expires on the date that you specify. And then we have an expiry, which allows you to specify sort of a relative duration based off of the last time they've accepted. From there, we can move to the policy acknowledgement, which allows you to specify whether or not you would like to prompt the acknowledgement of identity. Maybe you want to specify, yeah, I want them to say I am the legal parent or guardian. I can also select whether or not I want them to confirm their age and majority. So in some circumstances, athletes are handling their own account, maybe if they're 15 to 17, but they're not yet in the age of majority. So you can actually prompt a parent or guardian to be the one to accept on their behalf. Additionally, in the acceptance requirements section, we can specify whether or not this policy is mandatory by toggling this option. If a policy is mandatory, they need to view and accept it in order to proceed. If a policy is not mandatory, they do need to view it, but they don't need to accept it. Additionally, you can toggle whether or not you would like a digital signature, which is them typing in a name, which of course you can report on as well for additional proof that they've not only reviewed but accepted that policy. And last but not least in this section here, you can allow the policy acceptance to be sent to another party member by email. So this is a great way, again, if the athlete is handling things themselves, but they need to send it to their mom or dad, or if it's a coach registering someone on behalf of the parent or guardian, they can actually email this policy to the correct person, and that way they can accept it on their behalf. In the next section here, we have the acceptance details, and this is the policy details. This is, of course, the information of the policy itself. So this is where all that nitty-gritty information is going to be. And of course, you can edit this however you need with this WYSIWYG editor here. Very similar to Microsoft Word. You can make a thing bold in different sizes, etc.
One thing to keep in mind is that when a policy is accepted by your members or your participants, that the exact wording for which they clicked accept on is saved at the time of the acceptance. So if you come back and let's say you have a photo waiver policy that you've just changed slightly because the world has changed in terms of social media or whatnot. If you change that policy, Uplifter will track which version of the policy that was clicked and accepted at the time of acceptance. So we do keep track of that in the background.
Absolutely. And finally, in the last section here, you have a link to option, which is very similar to what we saw with the subscriptions, where we can tag specific elements within our system to determine who sees this policy. So for instance, maybe we have a safety policy for our Cangym. They're maybe not as agile as the older kids. So maybe we want to do Cangym. And that way, our Cangym participants, when they register for a program, see this policy, but no one else would. We can also do things like just a rec and stuff like that. So you can get as specific or as broad as you need to, just like you can with the subscription. So maybe you actually wanted to do a category level. So maybe it's just your kids category level, or maybe it's just your purple badge for whatever reason has a specific policy. You can absolutely do that. You can even get down to programs if you want to as well.
The policies feature is quite robust in terms of the different options that you have available to you. We do have a number of videos that again talk about some very specific use cases that clubs have run into, especially over this last year, whether it be COVID risk acknowledgements or a concussion policy type policy for particular provinces. So definitely check out our Learning Center or check out the other videos that we have available on this topic.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And just as a quick reminder of that, as we touched on in the permissions section there, you can always select this article icon here based off of the page that you're on. It will take you directly to the most pertinent article based off of that page. And this is a great place to not only learn about all the different elements, but very often our sections will have a webinar which you can watch and learn even more information about that topic. Excellent. So that is all of the core elements. I know it's been quite a bit, and there's actually even more to learn and even more to do with Uplifter. There's so many cool things that let you not only create what you need, but present it how you want. Again, there's a whole public website element to it as well. If you're on the gold tier of Uplifter, you can actually concoct your own website. You can connect it with your own, owned URL. There's so much cool stuff that you can do with Uplifter. So if you want to do something, you're not quite sure if you can or not, you can always reach out to us and get some help. So let's talk a little bit about that. So first and foremost, down in the bottom right hand corner, there is the help icon, which allows you to first search the Learning Center here. So maybe we want to learn a bit more about invoices. We absolutely can do so. If we go through these articles here, we don't happen to find it, or maybe we don't have the time to go through these articles, can actually send our support staff a message. So leave us a message here. Additionally, if you want to do so directly, you can do so to our email, support@uplifterinc.com. We can absolutely help you out as soon as possible and make sure that you get all your questions and concerns answered. Make sure that everything's running nice and smoothly on your Uplifter system. Jackie, any final thoughts?
Yes, so except for the permissions page, all the different pages that we've touched upon on this introduction, all of these pages appear in every tier of Uplifter, from light, bronze, silver, gold, and enterprise. With each of those tiers, though, you might have different options on each of those pages. What we've tried to do with this introduction is give you a brief overview of what you would need to sort of get set up with the system, familiarize yourself with some of the core features of Uplifter so that you can get up and running with your registration. And if you do have a question with respect to which features are available on those specific pages based on the tier that you selected, feel free to contact us at support@uplifterinc.com, as Garrett has said, and we can certainly help you figure out what feature is available and how to configure it based on your use case, because we know that clubs come in all different shapes and sizes and they need to do things in all different ways. And I'm fairly sure that we at Uplifter have tried to accommodate the very many different ways that clubs will operate. Thanks so much for joining us today for our introduction for Uplifter for our gymnastics clubs. We do hope that you did learn a lot, and if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out and ask us. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.